Britain's housing market might be more screwed than you think. Now, I'm used to my friends moaning that they've got no chance of buying their first flat, buying their first home, because they simply can't afford it. But there's a new genre of moaning I've noticed happening recently too, and that's among my, let's say, slightly older, slightly better off friends who are already on the housing ladder. They're now saying that they can't sell their flats either. It's like the market's come to a complete standstill. So what's really going on? Hello and welcome to Reality Check. Less spin, more stats. I'm Michael Simmons, the Spectator's economics editor. Now, when Labour came to power, they had all these, grand missions and things they were going to achieve. And the one that selfishly I was most interested in was their one on house building, because as we all know, the housing market's been in a lot of bother for a lot of years. And they said they were going to build their way out of this crisis. In fact, they set an ambitious target of building 1.5 million new homes by the end of this parliament. Well, when I had a look, they were absolutely nowhere near that. In fact, they seem to be going in the wrong direction. I was a bit bemused, if not a bit angered, to watch Steve Reid at the weekend saying that, everything was sorted, that the housing market was moving again. And he was banding around the statistic that there had been an 18% year-on-year increase in the number of new homes that were being built.
Well, we've just, the housing sector has been flatlining for years. Since about 2023, we've seen really low levels of house building going on. In part, that's because the previous government scrapped the house building targets. Now, we've changed the law already to speed up the planning process so that we can get applications through the system faster, with the public still being able to have their say about what's being put forwards, but we're just starting to see things turning around. So figures I saw last week, it's that current, showed that the starts on new house building has gone up 18% compared to a year ago. That's nearly a fifth.
Now, he was telling the truth, but he'd picked this obscure period that was from January last year to September. It was 18% up on the year before. But what Steve Reid neglected to tell viewers was that this 18% increase came after a 50% slump. And in fact, if you compare home starts to their peak in 2023, we're still 40% down from that peak. So Labour are well off this target, and we're, as a country, are, as a result, still miles away from where we need to be in terms of the housing that we need to add to the stock. You might think then that this would be a boom for current homeowners. With constrained supply, surely prices should just keep going up and up and up. But that's not happening at all. When you factor in the price of everything else, i.e. inflation, and when you adjust house prices for inflation, you see that the market's actually crashing. In some parts of the country, it's totally collapsing. In fact, if you'd bought the average house the last time the market kind of peaked, which was in 2022, you'd now lost £60,000 in real terms. That's one almighty ouch in a market which everyone tells you you can't lose money in. It's way worse in the capital city, London. I was having a look at the proportion of homeowners that end up having to sell their property for a loss. And in London, it's now worse than anywhere else in the country. In fact, in the last year that we have data for, 15% of homeowners ended up selling for a loss. And that's nearly doubled since 2019. So what was once unthinkable seems to be becoming more and more common. And as with everything in the housing market, and I'm sorry to say, as with many things in this country, it's the young that are getting screwed the most. If you look at the Help to Buy scheme, which was designed to get young people into the market through things like the Help to Buy ISA, the Help to Buy equity loans, some of the performance is really dreadful. I was having a look at the numbers for what happens once someone's bought a home or a flat on Help to Buy and then move on to their next home, on that next rung of the ladder. And astonishingly, last year, nearly half of people who had bought a flat on the Help to Buy scheme had to sell it for a loss. That's astonishingly poor performance for something that's not just meant to get people into homes, but it's meant to, really boost and kickstart their financial health. And it's yet more evidence of my theory that the housing market has perhaps already crashed. Now, you might think, great, isn't this the perfect time to buy then, if the market's bottoming out? But the trouble is, we still have this problem on the other side of the equation too, affordability. The average first-time buyer home still costs, even after this real terms crash, about 5 times more than the average earnings. And for many people, that's simply not affordable. And that gap has just widened over the last few decades too. Compare it to the early 80s and it was 2.7 times, which was a much more achievable goal for most people. But could there be some good news around the corner? Well, perhaps, but it's a bit complicated. The Bank of England will make their next decision on interest rates this week, and everyone expects them to hold them at 3.75%. I think that's probably right. We're not going to see a cut at this next meeting. However, the market has priced in for the rest of this year as inflation continues to trickle down, definitely 1, if not 2, further cuts. And the mortgage market seems to already be reacting to this. Last week, a few of the bigger lenders announced that they would start loaning mortgages of a value of 6 times people's income in the coming months. And that should help people tackle that 5 times difference problem. It should mean that people can get mortgages that actually unlock houses. But that's the supply side. And if we don't fix the demand side that I started talking about at the beginning of this episode, if we don't get that housing target hit, if we don't build more houses, then all this is going to be is a temporary sugar rush that maybe turns the trajectory around on prices, puts them going back in the upward direction without actually doing anything to properly address affordability in the long term. So I'm afraid to say we've found ourselves in the worst of both worlds. People who are trying to get on to the housing ladder are finding it impossible to do so because we're just not addressing affordability, and even the first-time flat is just too expensive. But those who are already on the ladder, or those who are looking to downsize, finding themselves trapped in their homes because there's just simply no buyers to sell to. Thanks for listening and watching Reality Check. If you're joining us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and tap the bell so that you never miss an episode. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then give us a follow too. And don't forget, every Friday we have a newsletter rounding up the show and some other economic news from the week. And for more information on all of that, just go to spectator.com/realitycheck.